welcome or welcome back to Kimbo's Crafts. I'm Kimbo and this is where I do some crafts. Today is going to be a little bit of a different one. Prior to this I've been doing paper crafts. Today though I'm going to have you join me for a little craft I came up with. So what's going on is if you haven't noticed by now, I have some sinus issues, so I'm constantly sniffling and stuff, and so I always need to have a tissue box in my car. And so this one is actually, I just went and got it for my car because I need it for examples, but it's been crushed and those sorts of things because, well, it's rough to have a just random box of tissues rolling around. And I don't really like having the small travel tissues. They don't last very long. I don't think they're very cost effective. So what I have in my car is this interesting cubby. It runs along the side of the console. For those of you who might have a Subaru Outback, you would probably know the recent version has this, the recent models. So it has this cubby that I don't really have a use for. It's just been sitting there. And it dawned on me that I could make a customized small travel bag kind of thing for my tissues to go in that little cubby. And so I went and took some measurements and here they are. I printed these with my Kodak step printer so they can work as our references here for the measurements and how I'm going to draw it up. Basically, I'm going to make a cloth holder. It's going to look very similar to the same sort of structure here with a slot in the middle to pull it out, but it'll be Velcroed or buttoned or pinned. It depends on what I have. I haven't had a chance to go look at what I already have in my sewing kit, but it'll have some sort of closing, and then I'll be able to take out a portion of a tissue box, put it in there as I need, and so one of these boxes would last a little bit longer and stop rolling around and getting crushed everywhere in my car. Pretty simple. But yeah, this is a good example of a craft just sort of solving a problem, and using basic sewing skills, you can go ahead and create one along with me if you like. So first things first, I need to get an idea of the exact measurements of tissues. It's kind of funny. I think if you were to get a cube box, not just a regular rectangular box, the tissues are folded in a U shape, but the exact same size. So for reference, it doesn't have to be a box like this. Okay, there's no going back now. Okay. So looks like it's comfortably 4.5. I'm going to go with 8.5 tall. Okay, so my cubby measurement is actually 9 inches. What I'm going to make is a bag width. That's 8.5 inches, so it will fit the 9-inch cubby. That's great news. As far as how tall it's going to be, the 4.5-inch wide, I'll probably go 5 inches just to give it room to get them in. No reason for them to be super tight, and especially if you want them to come out easily. You don't want to pack them in there as tight as possible. So I'll be pretty generous, probably go 9 inches by 5 inches. And then the cubby is just 1 inch deep, so it'll be pretty shallow. And luckily I picked out very thin fabric to use, so it'll just be 1 inch deep. But that gives me the measurements to come up with the layout. I'm basically just going to come up with a plan. Not so much a pattern, although I could work a pattern from it. I'm going to create my own pattern basically. Okay, so this is just sort of the rough draft I came up with. Now I will be using from Joann's this remnant that I picked up with plenty of fabric, and it's a pretty complimentary color for the interior of my car. You can't spend a little bit more, pick out the exact fabric you want. It's not going to take too much at all. We'll probably be able to calculate it here when I get the pattern. laid out, but it won't be much at all if you want to go ahead and pick out something specific to your tastes. I prefer to use remnants. It's part of that reduce, reuse, recycle mindset, and also it's quite affordable. So I was lucky enough to find one that a fabric that I like, and also it's a flannel, which is very easy to sew. So all of those things give it a good benefit. So stay tuned. Next up, I will show you how to lay it out, cut out the pattern, the fabric that we're going to use, and then sew it all together. Okay, so now we have the fabric that I got from Joann's. It's a flannel from the way it feels, and I washed it. Now, if this is your first time ever doing a sewing project, let me just tell you, you're going to want to wash it. It's better for the fabric, and also if you expect to ever wash it in the duration of using it, like especially if it's clothing, in this case, it's probably going to get all linty inside there. Something might spill on it. There's a high chance I'm going to wash it. So you want to pre-wash the fabric, dry it, and that helps shrink it and just get all the fibers to sort of relax. Plus, there's a lot of chemicals on these fabrics, especially when you get them from Joann's, to help them preserve them, I guess, on the shelf, which is kind of interesting. You wouldn't think there would be, but you can definitely feel the difference after washing it. And I know there is chemicals on there, so just washing them off is good. So here we have the fabric, and I've drawn up in a very kind of ugly fashion a idea of how I'm going to cut the pieces to do this. I'm going to cut the fronts and sides in one piece, so it just sort of sews down the sides. So we get a box. I'll cut a slit into it for the pull through. I'm going to keep it a pretty small slit because that way it helps, I guess, pull through one at a time with the tension. And then on the back, instead of doing something like Velcro, hooks, buttons, anything like that, I'm actually just going to have overlapping flaps. That way it's easy access in and out. No need to have to fuss with buttoning it. So it's just going to be two large pieces that are going to overlap on the back. So you'll see when we get to putting it together. Right now, I'm just going to draw it out on the fabric, just using the design that I came up with and the measurements. I'm going to use my little T-square here to help lay it out and then cut out the pieces so that I can go ahead and sew them into an assembly. Some things to keep in mind: if I wanted it really starchy and stiff, I could double layer the fabric, sew them together. I could put in a stiffener. These are things like that are options if you're making an actual fabric covered tissue box that you want to stand up and be sturdy. I don't necessarily want that. I want it to be able to squish nice enough, but I still want it to have give to it so I can get it into that slot that I have in mind in my lovely Outback. And so I don't want it to be stiff. I don't want it to have to fight it. I just kind of want it to go in there and sit relatively upright and not be atrocious to look at or rolling around on the floor where I can step on it. That's really the goal. So those are some things to keep in mind. Also, earlier I mentioned that I would come up with an idea of how much fabric you actually need if you're doing this. Honestly, because this is folded in half and shrunk at this point. And I would say we've got about 21 inches. So 42 inches wide. That's pretty positive that's more than enough for your needs. And so you could probably get away with about 8 inches minimum. You know, I would just go 12 inches. So a remnant that's about 12 inches of a scrap of fabric should work for you. So I'm going to go ahead and lay it out, draw out the lines, and then cut it. I am probably going to use a permanent marker. My stepmother, who taught me how to sew, would probably be worried about looking at something like that, but I'm going to just use permanent marker so it stands out to me and I can cut it. And also all of the lines are going to be inside seams and permanent marker won't bleed. So in fact, I'm sure it won't, not without some vinegar or something. So I'm going to use that just because that's what I have easily on hand and is easily visible. So I'm going to draw them out, cut them out, and then show you the pieces. Okay, so here's kind of how it looks. It's a little messy, but I got my pieces here. So this is where the fold is. I drew out the major box. I'm going to put in the slit layout. Over here for the strips, I cut the measurement in half because I didn't have quite 9.5 inches. So I just have 4 3/4 because there's the fold there. So I'm just going to cut them and it'll fold out. So that's the way I drew them out with just this square. Little carpentry minimized skills here. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut them out and then we'll sew. Okay, so here I am completing the project with my sewing machine. It's just a basic Singer sewing machine, and here I am using bias tape in black that I picked up from Walmart. You can also get it at Joann's or most any fabric retailer, it seems. And I'm using it because it reinforces the openings where I want to pull through the tissue. So that's how I am lining the slit in the front of the box where I'm intending to pull through the tissues. And so I just put 2 separate pieces, and I sped up the video here because I don't sew very fast, so I sped it up a little bit. And so I'm sewing the 2 different pieces, and then I go back and I use kind of a zigzag pattern stitch on the sides, going back and forth a few times to sort of reinforce it, and that way I didn't have too much bulk by trying to turn corners with the tape there in the corners. So that's how I finished the front there to reinforce where you pull through the tissues. After that, I sewed down the sides. So there's 4 corners. They're really short. They're only an inch. So I sewed them down. If you've sewn before, it's pretty simple. You want to put the outside of the fabric together when you sew and pinch them together. That way when you fold it reverse the fold, you'll have the seam on the inside. So that's how that is, and it's just simple straight stitch, backing it up to reinforce those corners. So here I get them done pretty quickly because they're short. And then from there, I decided to attach the 2 strips to the back. Instead of using a Velcro or a button closure, I decided for the ease of use to just have 2 separate flaps that overlapped a little bit. And I also back up the edge of that with the bias tape, and that way you have it's reinforced for the entry of putting in the tissues, and also it's quick, easy out, much more easy to manipulate the tissues when you get them in there so that you're able to use it. And I thought with it being pushed into the side of the console, there's no real risk of anything opening, so it really didn't need to be secured too strictly with any hooks, buttons, or Velcro. So here I am attaching those side pieces. Now the last step is when you finish, of course, you want to remove all of the strings, and then you're going to reverse the bag so that the stitches are on the inside and make sure everything fits, which you'll see me do that here. Something I learned doing this project is, that the measurements not always work out perfectly. I should have added a little bit more to those 2 flaps. And so I ended up getting a little bit of a pucker there, but it wasn't enough to have me scrap that part of the project and recut those. I was able to sort of sew around the problem. I think that just comes with experience. It's not perfectly flawless, but it is usable. And as you can see here, it'll work just fine holding the tissues. At least bare minimum, I can do measurements and get the right sizes needed. And so this is a quick demonstration of how it all tucks in. I was able to get all of the tissues I had left in the box and probably a little bit more in. And it pulls right out. Here is the final product in place in my car. I couldn't be happier with the results. Thank you.